Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tropes have been on my mind a lot lately as I've been outlining for a book, so today I figured I want to talk about why they're great. Also, it's because there's a funny thing I've noticed in more than a few booktube and authortube videos by this point. Basically the internet at large has this stance, it seems, and that is whenever someone talks about tropes, it's always done in a really negative light. I've seen too many reviews by this point that say something along the lines of, well, the book was good, but it gets kind of tropey at times. Well, duh. Stories have tropes all the time. Tropes are everywhere. They are literally unavoidable. So yeah, I just want to talk about why tropes are good for storytelling and why their presence in a story is not a bad thing. So to start, what is a trope? Strictly speaking, a literary trope is the use of figurative language via word, phrase, or image for artistic effect, such as using a figure of speech. More broadly, the word trope has come to describe any commonly recurring literary or rhetorical devices, as well as various elements such as characters and setting pieces. Tropes span every form of writing, whether it's prose or poetry, TV or film. Tropes are everywhere. And that's because at a base level, tropes are just building blocks for stories. They're neither inherently good or bad. They just are. They just exist. But they can be overused, and then they hedge into being cliche. Some common tropes in fantasy include the theme of good versus evil, heroic characters, the Dark Lord, quests to find or destroy an artifact, a MacGuffin, magic, fantastical races and species, and on and on and on. Some of these items appear to be more out of favor than others nowadays. You might have heard of this really niche indie show called Game of Thrones. One of the huge initial draws for the series was the morally gray characters. It was refreshing to see people who were nuanced, all equally capable of doing good or evil. Then the show took off, and suddenly the demand for grimdark and morally gray characters just skyrocketed. Too bad for viewers of the show that it completely abandoned every promise it had made and became a hollow shell of itself by the end by subverting our expectations for a good ending. I'm not still bitter, why would you think that? In my opinion, morally gray characters has now become more overused than what it was originally reacting against, which was the good and evil characters. While morally gray feels realistic on the surface, the way it's usually enacted, where everyone is capable of the same level of selfishness, honestly is not that realistic. People actually can indeed be good or bad. Just because you deviate slightly from your usual course once or twice doesn't suddenly make you go neutral.
What makes a man turn neutral?
Another issue with lamenting some stories as tropey is that genres are defined by their tropes. When you pick up a fantasy book, you bring certain expectations to the story, and having a good experience will hinge on those being met. You're typically going to expect some kind of magic and probably a secondary world. Obviously you can set your story here in the primary world, like with urban fantasy, but I'm still going to expect magic at the very least, because without some fantastical element, it's not fantasy. But because magic is so pervasive in the genre, it should be considered a trope, and it is. And yet, it's not like readers want magic removed from fantasy. Same goes for secondary worlds. Is a setting in a fake land a trope? Absolutely. Is it still awesome? Of course. I think what people are really just trying to say when they use the word tropey is cliche. But tropes only become cliche when they are used more than there is demand for them. Magic is always going to be in demand in fantasy, so it's not cliche to have magic in your book. Some tropes just purely aren't in demand anymore. Killing off a character whose sole purpose is to advance another character's story is cliche. It's actually a trope called fridging, and this one already has its own issues because it usually gets used in a pretty sexist way because it's typically a woman being killed off to advance a man's story, and then he just kind of moves on past her pretty quickly, and it's kind of weird, but it's also generally just considered cliche because people don't want it that much anymore. So in summary, every cliche is a trope, but every trope is not a cliche. Certain tropes go in and out of style, just like fashion and food, but your tastes may stay the same while others change, and that's fine. I think morally gray characters are still popular, but not nearly as much as when Thrones was in its heyday. And sadly, studios are still scrambling to find the next Game of Thrones in an attempt to exploit what made it popular. And by doing so, they're ruining other properties by adapting things and turning non-morally gray stories into just that. Cough, cough, Wheel of Time. I assume we'll see that trope feel more and more stale as time goes on and more fantasy IPs receive tragic adaptations. If you're a writer, the most important thing to remember is that you should write whatever the heck you want. If you like the trope of a a plucky farm boy chosen one who has an unknown royal heritage, go for it. And who knows, since it's so rarely used anymore, you might be the one who revitalizes it. But when you're writing, write for your own tastes. Don't try to worry about what's popular in the market currently. You want a story that you want to read. Plus, another part of the fun with tropes is that you can find new ways to use them that feel classic and fresh at the same time. And so for anyone who does critique books or movies or TV shows as being tropey, I recommend that you take a critical eye to something that you think is not tropey and really drill down to the core components of the story, and I guarantee you're going to find tropes. Because without tropes, you wouldn't be reading a story, you'd be reading a journal. So that's the short version of my trope rant and why tropes are good. I'll probably go more in depth into other tropes that I like or dislike in a future video, but I think that's all for today. As always, thanks for stopping by my channel. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts on various stories and updates from my own writing journey. Leave a comment below if you have any strong or mild opinions about tropes. Let me know what some of your favorite tropes are, some of your least favorite ones, or feel free to just say hello. I post new videos on Sundays. Until next time, I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you here in the next video.